Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Namaskara and welcome to the All Things Policy episode. I'm Sowmya Prabhakar, and today we're diving into a world where boardrooms meet geopolitics. And my special guest here is Srividya V, author of The Great Disruption, How Geopolitics is Changing Companies, Managers, and Work. I also have with me my colleague Bhumika Sevkani, who's a research analyst with us. So we are going to bombard Srividya with questions that intrigue us. And of course, looking at the policy and the geopolitics landscape, we have a lot to ask you, Srividya. So welcome to the All Things Policy episode.
Thank you very much for having me here. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So just to kind of set the context, like from supply chains being shaken up by wars to managers suddenly needing this foreign policy instinct, right? I think Srividya's book asks like a bigger question on what happens when geopolitics becomes a core business risk. So today we're going to unpack on how companies and the people inside them are rewriting their playbooks in a turbulent world. So going with the first bits of it, Srividya, you argue that geopolitics is no longer like a distant backdrop, right? You say that. So what is that aha moment that actually convinced you how now a boardroom issue is not just like a diplomat or a person in the foreign affairs or international relations alone to be worrying about it, but everybody's game for that matter?
So I think it's important to realize that actually managers are very smart people, but they're very busy people, right? So it's not that they never cared. It's just that they have many things on their plate, like all of us. They have many things on their plate, and attention is diverted to the most pressing issue. That means the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So, so in a time when there was geopolitics was in the background, they were not paying attention to it, not because they didn't think that it was somehow more or less relevant, but it was just an enabler. So if you think about the managers who came of age in the last 30 years or so, who went to business school 20 years ago, geopolitics was certainly relevant for their businesses, but it was a tailwind, right? It was helping them access new markets, explore new avenues, enter industries where previously they couldn't. So most of it was just them thinking about market opportunities, but these market opportunities were facilitated by geopolitical forces. Now, when we are seeing geopolitics as a headwind, they're having to navigate a different set of challenges. So it was not that they didn't have to deal with this, but they're having to deal with a different side of geopolitics today than what they had to do in the past. So I think the fundamental questions today are, how do we overcome some of the challenges rather than are we riding the wave? So that's why I think this is having a different type of effect.
Interesting. So, Srividya, while you were here also in our office, we did talk about this. What's interesting for me is having been in a people function role in the corporate sector, product and then aerospace company, what I realized is people were very clued into management jargon and everything that works in the favor of business, but felt that government affairs and corporate affairs team where like a one-off person is hired to engage with all stakeholders, right? Like it could be liaising with the government or looking at the landscape of it. It felt it was their job and not everybody's responsibility. And the same struggle I see even now, where a lot of people think armchair suggestions are, a thing, but you don't want to step into action or you don't want to think beyond it, right? It's nice to give suggestions. So in the public policy side, while we deliver our courses for working professionals, the same struggle that they probably can't convince their managers if they're in a tech role to say why they need a public policy domain expertise or even fairly understand the spectrum of things that influence it, right? So that's where we are. So interesting to know that that game is going to look a little different. All of us are going to be more clued in into it.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, I ran a little experiment recently. I just went into a jobs board and I started looking at the description for companies that were hiring for the role of managers. So I wasn't looking at corporate affairs or government affairs, but it was quite striking, the aspects of the job that were being advertised. One of the things that kept coming up repeatedly was the ability to navigate and manage different stakeholders. And of course, stakeholders are many, but many of those job descriptions also talked specifically about navigating export restrictions, figuring out how to work with governments and policies, making sure you're up with regulations. And these were not job descriptions for government affairs functions or corporate affairs functions. These were job descriptions for just product manager, IT manager, senior manager, these kind of roles. So I think you're right that it's kind of seeping into different managerial roles, and it's not restricted to the small division on government affairs or corporate affairs. And even if you think about the evolution of government or corporate affairs within the company, it used to be, as you said, often like a one-off, one person or a few individuals doing their own thing, not really integrated into the strategy of the company. But that I think also is changing. Right? So today they're at the center of the discussion. If you want to figure out a very business decision, that's integrating the insights of corporate and government affairs. So I think it's definitely changing within companies.
Yeah. So Bhumika, you want to go next?
Yes. So I just wanted to ask, so what are some of these challenges that if you can elaborate on them, that you think corporates have now considered for integrating them into their strategies?
So fundamentally, companies still are looking to make business decisions. So I think that's my starting point, right? So they're still interested in trying to figure out how to make money, how to be profitable, how to succeed as a business. And so they're still making decisions about, is this the right project? Should I invest in this particular opportunity? How much should I invest? What's going to be the return on investment? So pretty much the decisions are still, very much business decisions. What I think is impacting those business decisions are companies having much less confidence or considering aspects of what will shape that business decision. And the way I argue in the book and what I look at it is there's at least 4 different things that are going on which influence that business decision. So one is, do companies have the confidence of continued market access? Like if you're a global company and you're investing or looking at evaluating projects in different parts of the world, you want to know that you will continue to have access to that market. So that's something that builds into your business model, but that's deeply impacted by geopolitics. The second aspect is, are we going to compete on a level playing field? And so if we go and invest and decide to work in another country or in another market, what is the playing field going to look like? Are we going to have a systemic disadvantage, or are we going to be able to play on a level playing field? Again, this is a factor that's deeply shaped by geopolitics. And another element is, what about investment security? Like if I decide to engage in global markets, am I confident that these assets that I'm investing in are going to be safe, secure, that I can repatriate profits, that individuals, people, managers that I post in those locations or employees that I have in those markets are going to be safe and secure? Again, this is a factor that goes into a business decision, but is very much shaped by geopolitics. And then the final element, I think, is about institutional alignment. To what extent can we expect similar standards, institutions across countries? Now, obviously, this is never going to be the same. There's going to be a cost of doing business in a foreign market. But to the extent that we can reduce some of the frictions, it makes that business decision easier. But geopolitics is shaping that as well. So ultimately, I still think that it is a business decision. Should I invest in this market or not? Should I invest in this project or not? But the factors that go into tipping that business decision one way or the other are geopolitical in nature. Like whether you have access to the market, whether it's going to be a level playing field, whether there's investment security, and what the extent of institutional alignment.
Okay. Great. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a segue into this and see how a new era of, say, economic statecraft, right, like with tariffs, the export controls, or an industrial policy. So, as a primary foreign policy tool, how do we kind of make sure that this is a response to the market? One is how the markets are playing out. And if we had to use the framework of the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar, there's equal amount of citizenship or the movement of what activism looks like. And there is a bazaar that's responding to it. So what's your view on that, Srividya?
So I think the tools are many. So the policy tools are many. Right? So whether you can think of economic statecraft and many different tools that states have and governments have in terms of driving businesses or bazaar or in any way that is aligned with the goals and objectives of the state. So whether it is tariffs, whether it is export controls, whether it is import restrictions, whether it is just outright bans, whether it is, the tools are many. But ultimately, the tools are designed in a way that try to address the externalities of what the business is doing. Right? So the reason that the tools come into play is because governments really are concerned about the national security externalities of what might be simply a business decision. So when a company is investing abroad, as a simple example, take the case of NVIDIA. NVIDIA would like to sell to customers in China because they're customers that help to bolster the profits of NVIDIA. But a business decision of a single company could have the national security externalities that are felt by others outside of the company. And this is, in a way, the reason why we see this integration of business and politics, or the integration of geopolitics and commercial decisions. So it is about economics, but it's also about geopolitics. So you have individual companies profit maximizing, making decisions that are well within the way we generally think of as this is a smart business decision, or is a decision that is profit maximizing and helps this company do better, but also has potentially adverse consequences, either in terms of what governments being concerned about spillover of technology, of knowledge, or the different use cases, but also governments being concerned about dependence on foreign actors, or governments being concerned about the limited oversight and the ability they have over the local economy if it is being taken over by a foreign company. So I think it's this type of interaction, the spillovers or the externalities that happen from business decisions that really tie geopolitics and commerce.
Great.
So, Srividya, since we were talking about economic statecraft here, we do talk a lot about how major powers like US and China practice economic statecraft, controlling enterprises to, as per their concerns, right? As you mentioned, preventing spillover of technology and all of that. But could you also shed some light on how emerging economies are practicing economic statecraft, given that shifting geopolitical and economic dynamics can create significant opportunities for emerging economies to leverage their respective strengths and secure critical positions in supply chains. So can you tell us about some of their strategies, and how do companies respond to the strategies of emerging economies?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Fundamentally, I don't think it's that different. Fundamentally, I think whether you're an emerging economy, whether you are a major power, the concerns are pretty similar, right? So this is concerns about having foreign companies that are maybe playing a major role in the domestic economy, concerns about whether rents that are generated by a foreign company in the host country are being repatriated to improve the power of the foreign country, and concerns about using information or coercion or manipulation of the host country. So I think the concerns are pretty similar, whether you are a large power, whether you're a middle power, whether you're an emerging economy. I think the concerns are similar. I think where the distinction, or probably the role of emerging economies may be slightly different, is also having to navigate the different major powers. and understanding the relationship between the major powers and what the spillover effects of that interaction may be for companies that are located in emerging markets. Now, this could be both an advantage as well as a disadvantage. So if you think about, for example, the case of India, where we saw, if you go back to maybe a year ago, we saw many Indian companies that were gaining at the expense of Chinese companies because we saw American foreign investment being redirected to Indian companies. Now, that was a dynamic in some sense that was triangular, right? So you had the US-China relationship, but you also had the India-China relationship, and you had the India-US relationship. And so Indian companies were at a relative advantage in this, network of multiple countries, and they were gaining. But if you think about today, we can see that, with the increased tariffs on Indian companies by the United States, that in some contexts, they actually have a relative disadvantage compared to some of their competitors in other countries. So I think what really maybe is a little bit different is trying to think about the network effects rather than simply friends or rivals or just major power competition.
Great. So, Srividya, if we had to look at how the COVID phase helped us kind of move to this remote working kind of an opportunity, right? And the whole world took to it quite well. And now we have digital nomads of sorts. So today we see a little bit of pushback from only because there are tighter border restrictions or data localization that we need to think about. So do you think this is going to kind of look very different given how the geopolitics environment is shaping up?
Absolutely. I think, the promise of remote work was this, you can be anywhere, you can do your job from anywhere. And as long as you had your trusted laptop and a good Wi-Fi connection, everything was going to work really great. And the images we were sold in terms of you could be sitting by the pool or by the mountains or whatever, take your pick. It's very alluring. It's something we've all thought of at some point or the other. Wouldn't it be nice if we were able to do that? And governments got into the game, right? So there were all these digital nomad visas, so you could spend a year in Bali or whatever. The technology may allow it, but the way I see it, geopolitics is putting a pretty big dampener to that idea or that image of this remote work. And I think it's happening through all aspects of this. So first is who can do the work, right? So the promise of remote work was that work would be democratized. It didn't matter where you were. If you had the talent, you would have the opportunity. So that was one of the promises of remote work, that it would democratize work. But increasingly, we are seeing restrictions exactly on who can do the work, right? So think about, for example, visa restrictions or companies being told that certain projects can be staffed only by certain nationals, or you cannot deploy your company's workers of certain nationalities in certain countries. So who can do the work is no longer just about who has the skill, but it is about geopolitics in a sense. But it also has an impact on to what extent you can do the work remotely. You already mentioned restrictions on cross-border data transfer. Increasingly, companies are providing guidance to their employees in terms of don't travel with certain devices, or if you're in a different location, you can't tap into the databases of your company, even though you work for the same company. And so there are restrictions increasingly on your ability to work remotely simply because you can't access the resources that you need to do your work. And then the final element, I think, is when we talk about remote work, the idea is basically you have your job, and that job can be done. The same job can be done from anywhere, right? So as long as the job itself is malleable to being done from a different location. But I also think geopolitics is changing pretty much what the work itself is, right? So I gave you some of the examples we discussed earlier when I looked at these job postings about what the role of the manager, what companies are asking for when they're hiring managers. One of the things they're asking for is that you should be able to navigate government policies, work with government stakeholders, understand the different restrictions. And these are not tasks that can easily be undertaken or done remotely necessarily. And so we know, for example, there's a lot of relationship building with stakeholders, understanding their interests, but also their concerns. And all of this is much harder to pull off remotely than it is by being in the same location. So I think the nature of the work itself is changing. What is the job of a manager went from, let's look at how do we optimize a supply chain or create a budget that works, to also including in this scope of work, navigating or working with stakeholders, and that relationship building is not something that can easily be done remotely. So I think the whole nature of work itself is being impacted by geopolitics.
Right. So if I were to pick up something from here, you mentioned that the promise was that no matter where you are based out of, and if you have the necessary talent or skill, you will be given work, right? So the same sort of flexibility was also given to companies to explore global markets with the kind of market access that existed, right? And when you were here, you also mentioned this concept of corporate nationality. So if you could just briefly touch upon that. And there was another question that I would like to sort of ask along with this is, in the face of this growing geopolitical uncertainties, how are corporates responding collectively? And what is the role of industry or trade associations in times like these when intergovernmental cooperation is limited?
Thank you for that. I think maybe a way to think about this is how does geopolitics really impact companies, or which companies does it impact more or less than others? And what I would argue is that's a function not of how good your company's products are, how well you can provide service, how innovative your company is, or the expertise you have in the people that you hire. Rather, it is simply a question of where you're from. And by where you're from, I mean corporate nationality. So if you think about a policy tool like tariffs, generally, the way that we are seeing it play out in the last couple of months, for example, make no distinction between companies that are highly productive versus less productive. They don't make a distinction between companies that have a very good product quality versus low product quality. They're just making a distinction based on where the product is coming from, where the company that is exporting is located. So in a way, geopolitics influences companies and impacts risk, and the defining feature of that risk is corporate nationality, or where the company is from. So whether you are at a relative advantage or a relative disadvantage is going to be the location or the nationality. So when companies face this type of situation where their tools are very few, right? So it's not, you can invest a lot, much easier in trying to upgrade your product or trying to invest in human capital. Those are the types of things that companies typically have control over, and they can make changes in a way that's they see as within their control. But it's much harder to change your nationality. It's much harder to change where you're from. So I think one of the things is maybe trade associations play a role in this way because they help to provide collective bargaining, but they also play a very important role in just being an information broker for companies to understand what is going on. Not all companies have the bandwidth and the ability and the resources, frankly, to keep track of every policy change, to understand why this impacts them or what they should be looking out for. So I think trade associations play an important role in this, in serving as an information broker, but also helping in collective bargaining.
Great. So a little bit of an extension into the similar zone, Srividya. So if you look at, say, the 2008 financial crisis that happened, or look at recession that has been at intermittent points, right? Is this a phenomenon at this point that we see a lot of security or safety of workforce is being questioned, and how the diaspora is responding to it? Do you think that one is ease of doing business, right? Just the components of how the business dynamics work. But how does it look for like the workforce in general? Do you see less of it happening, or is the diaspora going to respond to it differently? What's the scene like?
That's a very interesting question. And as I'm thinking about this, I think fundamentally this comes down to what are the challenges that businesses can navigate and what are some harder challenges. And this is where I think the distinction exists between, for example, things like the ease of doing business. Some locations are just hard to do business in because we don't have the supporting infrastructure. And so we don't have necessarily the right intermediaries. We don't have the institutional support to undertake transactions. So the ease of doing business is low. It's hard to do business. But that way of thinking about the challenge for a business makes no distinction between businesses, right? So it's not that somehow the ease of doing business is low for one type of company but high for another type of company. It's somehow kind of related to the institutional infrastructure that exists, but doesn't really differentiate between companies in the risk or challenges that it poses to companies. Now, some companies may be better able to navigate that, but that's not because they face a different playing field than others. They just have better skills, or they've adapted their business or their business model to the location. And I think the geopolitical aspect is different. The geopolitical aspect is different because it precisely makes this distinction between locations, between the nationality of the companies. If you are an Indian company versus an Argentinian company versus an American company versus a Chinese company, you face different rules of the game. You face different challenges. The ease of doing business has been designed to be different for each of these types of companies. So I think that's a way that I see the distinction between the two. And to the extent that, whether it is diaspora, whether it is investors, foreign investors, I think it comes down to this essential question. It's not just about, can I navigate? Can I learn? Can I, figure out my way around the landscape where ease of doing business may be high or low, but am I kind of playing on a level playing field?
Okay. Bhumika, anything that you would like to ask?
There was just this one last question from my side, that in your book, you also highlighted the role of intergovernmental organizations in facilitating cross-border knowledge transfer. You also talked about global innovation in the beginning of the podcast, right? So just to take that further, the bilateral engagements also had a significant role in knowledge transfer across countries, right? In shaping this global innovation, and private sector is always integral to such forums, bilateral forums, which are issue specific or sector specific. But with this increasing securitization, I think we're only going to see maybe reduced bilateral engagement, or if you think maybe we can also see greater bilateral engagement. So what implications do you think this might have on corporations navigating such bilateral dynamics going ahead?
Yeah. So maybe, kind of an exercise, a very short exercise, just if you were to pause for 5 seconds, and if you were to think about what is the most challenging problem we as a world or humanity face, and if you were to just pause, maybe think about it for 5 seconds, the typical answers would be something, maybe you came up with something like conflict, war, hunger, movement of people, environment, sustainability, pollution. So these are all problems, what I call global problems. And I call them global problems in the meaning that they're not problems that can be addressed by actors, whether it's companies, governments, or scientific labs, in a single location. One country can't solve this problem by themselves. So clearly, we need to have a global solution to be able to solve these global problems. And this is where I think it's really important to have continued conversations and facilitation of cooperation for solving these big questions or the big problems that we face as a global society. And innovation, we need innovative solutions, obviously, to solve these kinds of problems. But innovation is also a global issue because the way we think about innovation, we all have this myth that there is this really super innovator who's just thinking about something. Suddenly there's a light bulb moment, and then we have this brand new innovation. Now, innovation, of course, does not work this way. It doesn't work this way. It's painful, slow process that is building little by little by many people all around the world. But what is also really critical and important to that is this diversity of information, knowledge, and views that help to build an innovative solution. So most innovative solutions really are, deeply steeped within one domain of expertise, but have a little bit of new knowledge or calling for some expertise from an unrelated domain. And that's what makes a truly innovative solution. So if we think about this in the context of global problems, then we need global solutions, but we also need innovative solutions. And private sector is a part of generating that innovative solution. And multinational corporations know this, right? So this is part of the reason why they go to different countries, because they're looking for that little bit of different type of knowledge or the different way of doing things that they can integrate with their knowledge base, that they can generate new insights and they can generate new solutions and innovative solutions. And as there are greater and greater restrictions on where they can go and how much they can engage with scientists and R&D and professionals around the world, companies also have to really have a very fine balancing act to pull off, because they're looking for diversity, but they're also restricted in how far they can go. So there is this corporate innovation is going to be impacted, but also corporate innovation, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the death of corporate innovation, but it's going to change, and the nature of innovation that we see will be different.
Yeah. So on a final question, while we have just about 3 minutes to go, Srividya, is like, if we are expecting now every company to be like a new geopolitical actor in the scene, right? What's that one looming risk you think most CEOs are still underestimating at this point?
I think it's maybe not paying enough attention to their regular jobs. And by that, I mean, a lot of companies are, for good reasons, paying a lot of attention to what's happening on the outside. But when attention is diverted to things that were maybe very salient today, a lot of that attention and managerial resources are coming from regular operational aspects of the company that they used to take up 20% of your time, that you're now spending on something else, whether it is optimizing your product, investing in new technology, generally running an efficient supply chain. Now, attention from all of those aspects has been driven to paying attention to some other external factors. So I think for a lot of companies, they need to kind of figure out what is the new normal. How are we going to continue doing the business while we're also kind of looking outside and paying attention to this world that is changing and in flux.
Great. Wonderful chatting with you, Srividya. Thanks for your time. Thanks, Bhumika, for joining in. I think to wrap up on this edition of the episode, I would say this reminds us that geopolitics isn't just headlines, right? Something that you read at the newspaper and then you kind of let it be, but it's almost become a daily variable in how we work, invest, and even hire people in organizations. So whether you're a student listening to this episode or a manager looking at global markets, I think the takeaway for us is at least clear that understanding the power politics is like a new professional skill one needs to have. So until our next episode, keep questioning, maybe grab more of foreign policy knowledge, and along with your quarterly reports, think about those updates as well. That's it from our side. Srividya, anything else that you want to close with in the last 2 minutes?
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Srividya.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.